Hello, everyone. Welcome to Mark's Top 10 Games of 2024, brought to you by the Game Vault Podcast. We're going to start off with a little warning. This list will contain spoilers, so if you have not finished the game here, I will probably mention something. I will try my best to avoid it, but I'll probably mention something spoilery. I think I do mention one in the second honorable mention on the list here. So just be aware that all the games, especially the top five, will be filled with spoilers. I will try and not do a lot of them, but they will be there. So let's get started with our honorable mentions. First one is Monopoly Go. Your boy here is 2800 level, somewhere in there, on that game. A game much further up on the list is replaced my When Bored at Work game. So I probably won't be touching this as much in the future, but it was a game I played all throughout the year. And my second honorable mention is less of a joke and more serious. It goes to Hades 2 Early Access. I was trying to find a way to put this onto the list, but I just couldn't figure out a way just because the release of 1.0 will probably put this on the list for that year, so I would like to make sure I have a fresh opinion of it at that point. But it did have one of the greatest gaming moments of the year, where you end up going up to Mount Olympus rather than continuing down through hell. So a pretty awesome moment there. That just I can't wait to see how much more they open up with it there. So without further ado, let's get on with our list. Coming in at number 10 is Call of Duty Black Ops 6. This is a game that I am just as surprised as you to see on this list. This is not because of a dislike of the franchise and its perceptions in the general gaming public, but rather, I judge these games on the single-player experience, which has been lacking at best. So I was pleasantly surprised that this year's campaign was a great bounce back from last year's dreadful showing with Modern Warfare 3. The characters and their motivations in Black Ops 6 are more varied and interesting than the one-note reasons we are given in the previous installment. The player movement and gun feel is better in just about every way, which makes the single-player campaign and the multiplayer one of the best I've played in a while. I went in expecting a milquetoast release, as I've been given in the previous games. But to my surprise, the campaign was much better than slightly improved, and I was blown away by the finished product. That is why it snuck onto this list at number 10. Coming up in number 9, Zenless Zone Zero. Zenless Zone Zero isn't my first foray into the Hoyoverse. I played way more of Genshin Impact than I'd like to admit, and it was one of the first games that I co-opted with the podcast's favorite niece, Kitty Ashcat. But ZZZ felt different almost immediately. The difference was not in the core mechanics of the game. It is still a gacha game after all, but rather the overall vibe. The setting, the story, and the combat all felt more up my alley than Genshin. But the first two may be enhancing my enjoyment of the last one. The board game-esque design of the missions levels was the first thing to grab my attention, but it was the characters that kept me going and wanting to play more. I'll admit that I fell off of it for a while as other games came out, but friend of the podcast, Jonathan, his Guess That Character game made me update the game and plan to dive back in. If I had more time, I feel like I would get lost in this game. MiHoYo has done a good job of making very similar games feel different enough that they capture different kinds of audiences. And those audiences may not have interest in the other games. It is quite the accomplishment. ZZZ is my number 9 game of the year, and one of the few I will probably still be playing in 2025. Number 8, Life is Strange, Double Exposure. This might be the most disappointing game on my list. While it is still a really good game, it didn't grab my attention as much as Max Caulfield's first outing. I I could actually make an argument that Double Exposure is a better game overall than Life is Strange, but the novelty of the 2015 game and its episodic release schedule grabbed me much more from the jump than this game did. Deck 9 did a great job of making Max feel more grown up in this game without losing the charm that made us want to follow her story back in the original. Just like True Colors and Before the Storm, Deck 9 was able to get the feel of the series while making it something distinct from Dontnod's version. The games are good and well-paced early, but they just can't stick the landing at the end. The thing I am most impressed with is how they weave everything from previous games into each installment and create sort of a Deck 9 / Life is Strange verse. I have not played Life is Strange 2, so any reference there is lost on me, but connecting the final decision of Life is Strange 1, Bay versus Bay, in the most innocuous way was on the same level as Steph showing up in True Colors after her appearance in Before the Storm. It wasn't some grandiose flashback, but rather they tell the story through who is messaging you on the phone in Double Exposure and a character showing up in the new game like Steph in True Colors. Even the Deck 9 polish and writing could not meet the expectations I had for this game, and therefore it lands in the bottom half of my list. Number 7, Like a Dragon, Infinite Wealth. Like a Dragon, Infinite Wealth falls in the same boat as Double Exposure. I loved the first game so much that it was bound to be a disappointment unless it was a truly exceptional game that built on the previous entry. Unfortunately, it is not. Ichiban is still one of the most likable protagonists in video games, but his Hawaii vacation loses the charm of the first game. This is mostly due to your new party members in Hawaii not being as interesting as Namba and Adachi were in the first game. This doesn't even include the fact that Kiryu is also a main character, and his presence steals a bit from the vibe of the original. And his story doesn't mesh with the motivations of Ichiban. The side stories and minigames are still top-notch, from a Pokemon Stadium ripoff to a Crazy Taxi clone, except you are delivering food, not people. Infinite Wealth gives you plenty of reasons not to progress the main story. It is the double-edged sword of this series. You spend so much time on the side stuff that the main story loses any momentum it had. A game further up this list found that balance perfectly, but RGG just has never been able to do that for any of the Yakuza or Like a Dragon games. Maybe this gets better as I finish the game, but by the 30-hour mark, it is usually difficult for my opinion to be swayed too much. Any other year, this would probably land at number 5 or higher, despite my disappointment. But there are way too many strong games this year. Infinite Wealth does land in the highest spot of my second tier of games. Number 6, EA Sports College Football 25. You never know how much you love something until it's gone. And boy, did I love college football video games. After 11 years, EA Sports found a way to navigate the new world of college football while shutting out the NCAA completely. A feat many thought would be impossible, but they were able to pull it off, and we were the beneficiaries of it. EA Sports College Football 25 was the game that I put the most hours into this year. 200 plus, according to Xbox. The game was everything I wanted, but that didn't mean there weren't some mistakes made. The two most glaring errors were, number 1, the only menu music is a repeating drumline track. Which, don't get me wrong, drumlines are awesome, but so are university fight songs. And number 2, the announcers do not say the players' names at all. The latter was something I did not notice until about 100 hours into the game. During a game, I realized that every time my receiver caught the ball, they would only say, "Great catch by the receiver," and not their actual name or even their number. You would think, with all the trouble they went through to resolve NIL issues, name, image, likeness, EA would have had the announcers at least say their names. These aren't game-breaking issues, but they are things that pull you out of the game a bit. These are probably the most obvious fixes for next year's game. The great thing about College Football 25 is that they were able to capture what made the previous installments different from their Madden counterparts. College football is much more of a free-flowing game, and players are more prone to errors because they are all between the ages of 18 to 22 years old and are still learning the game. Thankfully, the developers understood this, and there is not a rubber band effect in the game that I have seen. If you are better than your opponent and you do not hurt yourself, you can easily win a game by 2 to 3 touchdowns. And by better, I mean ratings-wise. This game was almost perfect, but I can't wait until the next installment. Number 5, Persona 3 Reload. I have come to the Persona series in the most roundabout way possible. I played and beat 4, then started 3 on the PSP, and then finished the epic journey that was 5. So when a 3 remake was announced, I was 100% on board. Persona 3 Reload both improved a lot on the original, but also kept the parts of the game that felt like a game from the late 2000s. The quality of life changes range from allowing you to control the party in battle to a better map system for tracking your social links. These were all very welcomed and helped the game fit in to the modern Persona vibe. The more sensitive issues were still present, such as the party shooting themselves in the head, the gun is even called an invoker, to summon their personas, and the unfortunate way they dealt with some of the side stories and social links. The unfortunate social links include a student trying to date a teacher and a teacher falling in love with a student online. While these both don't conclude in the worst way imaginable, they are not as funny as they may have been 10 to 15 years ago. And we cannot forget about the transphobic dialogue during the beach scene, which was an odd inclusion in 2024. None of these issues take away from how great the game is. The characters of Persona 3 give the ones in 5 a run for their money. I would even go as far as to say the characters fit together better than those in 5. Where 3 falls short in comparison to 4 and 5 is in its dungeons. Tartarus is not as compelling as the TV world or the Mind Palaces. It is closer to Mementos and has the same feel as a side dungeon. Persona 3 was the most fun I had on stream this year, and I cannot wait for Persona 6. Number 4, Indiana Jones and the Great Circle. Can a video game be the best movie in a series since the late 80s? If so, Indiana Jones and the Great Circle is just that. I do not know if it is because Harrison Ford was completely checked out of the last 2 movies, and Troy Baker was more engaged in his portrayal of Indy, or if it's as simple as the last 2 movies have just had some terrible writing. No matter what it is, there is no doubt that The Great Circle is one of the best Indiana Jones stories. Right from the beginning, Machine Games showed that they understood the assignment. The tutorial level is almost a shot-for-shot remake of the opening to Raiders of the Lost Ark. It was at this moment that I knew the game was going to be good and faithful to what made those early indie films fun. The main thing that they avoid in this game is making the 3 open world areas feel the same. This is not as easy as just making them look different. It also includes having the side missions and locations feel fresh. Machine Games bats 1,000 in this endeavor. The Vatican, Giza, and the jungles of Siam look completely different from each other and work in completely different ways. You never get bored while in the open world. As a bit of a history buff myself, the accuracy to which they made the regions feel like what I imagine the real-life pre-World War II counterparts actually looked like. They took great care with the setting, and it helped a lot with the immersion. Licensed games are always hit or miss. Just look at Star Wars' track record. And thankfully, this one is a grand slam. And who doesn't like to punch Nazis and fascists in the face? And there's a lot of that in Indiana Jones and the Great Circle. Number 3, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. For the better part of 2024, I believed that this would be my game of the year. It took over my life, and I always found time to play it, even if that meant losing sleep. And for the longest time, I thought nothing else would even come close. I did almost everything in the game in my 120 plus hours, and was never bored. It is truly an exceptional game that would have been number one any other year. Before we get into the game, I would like to take a few minutes to mention that Rebirth introduced the best card game that has ever been in a Final Fantasy game, Queen's Blood. It is both simple and complex in a way that I haven't seen since Inscription. I hope we get a standalone game at some point. Okay, back to the game. The ability to have an open world replace the concept of a world map is something that sounds good in theory, but is usually hard to pull off. While Rebirth doesn't perfect it, the dedicated open worlds are enough to not make them boring. The storytelling in just the setting is an incredible example of show, don't tell, with the best example being the craters in Junon, making the remnants of the war seem real. My only frustrating moment with the open world was in Gongaga, where I would get lost trying to figure out the mushroom launch pads. While the jungle looks gorgeous, the traversal for me took away from the aesthetics and ruined my time in Gongaga. The battle system was an improvement on the remakes, and I still am learning things I was not aware of as I watched through streamers and speedrunners just play the game to its nth degree. The link-up attacks and special moves kept the flow of combat going, which helped keep fights fresh as it went along. It made party selection more important if you wanted to limit the length of a battle, and help with the challenges laid out by Chadley. As for the story, you can check out our spoiler cast episode on this YouTube channel for my spoiler-filled thoughts. What I can say here is I felt the pacing and expansion of the story from the PS1 original were top-notch and only added to an already engrossing story. After watching the final chapter a few more times, I can admit it did lose steam at the end. The way the big moment is told was a little too ambiguous for me, but I hope that is because they will flash back to it in Part 3. All in all, the characters were fully realized, the expansion of the story was on point, and the content was never a slog, which is what made the 120 hours possible. Is an easy 9 to 9.5 out of 10. Number 2, Metaphor ReFantazio. Metaphor ReFantazio was a game on my radar, but not something I thought I would purchase on day one. Then Atlus put out a demo of the first 4 to 6 hours of the game, and I was immediately hooked. It was the same effect that the Final Fantasy XVI demo had last year, and something more games should do going forward, especially if your game's on the longer side. These demos help to get players hooked, and they are the best way to introduce younger players to the genre. What Metaphor did so well was take the Persona formula and improve on it in every way possible. The battle system allows for more strategy than just finding the weakness and doing an all-out attack. It really makes you think of your party layout, including the order they attack and who is in the front and back row. If you set things up wrong, you could be destroyed instantly. But if you do it correctly, the enemy may never get an attack off. It is the most rewarding battle system that Atlus has ever produced. It truly rewards you for understanding how everything works together and putting in the effort to realize how each of the archetypes work. The archetypes work like a job system, where everyone can do every job as long as you put in the time to learn it. It is truly a masterclass in a job type system, and I was completely surprised by how much I enjoyed it. The other great improvement is in the storytelling. Since Metaphor is not set in a Japanese high school, they were able to make the themes and relationships feel more grown up. This is especially true with the exclusion of the dating aspect that is so prominent in Persona. By not needing to worry about who you were going to try to romance, it allows the player to feel more free to explore everyone's story and not worry that they will mess up a relationship down the line. I was able to complete all bonds in my first playthrough and never felt that I was rushed to do so. The only real negative was that the final act of the game felt a little rushed and didn't completely stick the landing. But everything leading up to it was almost perfect and more cohesive than anything in Persona. The ending was saved by the epilogue, which was both satisfying and fit in perfectly with the story of your party. It did not feel like an add-on and left enough room for a sequel or DLC. Even with that said, it wasn't enough to stay in my top spot, which went to the game that burst into my life in the last month of the year and took the honorary Oxenfree Award for a game that Mark should have been in on sooner. And finally, number 1, Balatro. There are very few games that become an obsession of mine almost instantly. Balatro joins Marvel Snap, Inscryption, and Civilization V as games that I played at every opportunity I had. Snap and Balatro were also added to the iOS, so my obsession extended even to downtime at work. Balatro opens with a very simple concept that most people would have some experience in: poker. The level of experience you have with poker is both a blessing and a curse while playing the game, as the game immediately makes you rethink every poker strategy you have ever learned. The game is not so much about getting the best hand and beating the opponent, but rather which hand type gets you the most points. That is where the jokers come into play. Each joker has a special skill that matches up to a certain hand or card type and will enhance your score if you use them in concert. Sometimes pairs will be great, or sometimes it will be anything involving a face card. Knowing the jokers you have will dictate what cards you play or discard. Even the jokers have another level on them, as some add chips, multiplier, while others multiply what you already have on the board. Again, it's all about understanding the cards you have, the jokers you have, and what the score is to beat, and the best way to get there. The game adds ways to enhance cards and hand types with Spectral, Celestial, and Tarot cards, and using them in conjunction with the right Joker combo makes your run go as quickly as possible. I could go on and on about the strategies of the runs, but it is easier to just get in there and mess around yourself. I purchased the game on both PC and iOS, and have played almost the same amount of time on both. The unforeseen advantage to playing in two locations is I get to learn strategies on one to use on the other. Unfortunately, there is no cross-save, so they are completely different playthroughs. This has not diminished the fun for me. My top 4 this year was very difficult to order, but after thinking about the game that best does what it was designed to do while keeping the game interesting, it became very apparent that Balatro was almost a perfect game and was both the best and most favorite game I played in 2024. Thank you all for watching the video. Please be sure to subscribe here and also to anywhere where you get podcasts so you can listen to our weekly podcast, the Game Vault Pod News Hour. We will see you again next time. Bye!